Hey, before we get started with this episode of Northwards, just a little heads up. My guest and I are going to talk about some harsh stuff, emotional abuse, drug addiction, and we sometimes use some harsh language. As they say, it might not be suitable material for all ears. But for those of you who stay with us, I promise it'll be worth it.
You know, in hindsight, I had ignored so many warning signs, so many red flags, but about 3 months into marriage, he revealed to me that he was addicted to meth. And then you go into savior mode because you've put in the time and the effort and the money, and everybody came and all of your relatives flew in, and you're like, I gotta make it work. If I can't make it work, then what's wrong with me?
From NCPR, welcome to Northwards. People, ideas, and conversations from and about Northern New York, Vermont, and beyond. I'm Mitch Teich.
Support for the Northwards podcast comes from the J.C. Steiniger and M.E. McDonald Charitable Fund at Adirondack Foundation, in support of the Adirondack Foundation, building stronger Adirondack communities.
One of the things that people sometimes ask me, at least when they find out what I do, is how I decide who I'm going to interview, like how I find the guests on this show. Sometimes the answer isn't very interesting, even if the interview is, like the episode a while ago about a 19th century woman who stood trial for murdering an Ogdensburg man on a streetcar in Utica, and she was a medical student and a lobbyist and a spy and an abortionist. Fascinating interview. It started with a press release. But sometimes it is just about keeping your eyes open. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Burlington for an interview about the climate justice-focused soccer club Vermont Green FC. Feel free to go back and listen to that interview later. It is another good one. The club's co-founder, Patrick Inferna, and I were just sitting down to do the interview when he saw a woman heading up the stairs to the press box where we were set up. And he said, "Oh yeah, I think that's another meeting I have. That's Maureen Fitzgerald. She used to be a professional soccer player and she just moved here." He was right about that on all counts, and we exchanged hellos, and I made a mental note to Google her later because it is not every day that I meet a professional soccer player, current or former. So I looked her up and found out that former pro soccer player does not begin to describe Mo Fitzgerald. Yeah, she did play for the Portland Thorns of the National Women's Soccer League while she was teaching high school. But there's another part of the story, a difficult, heartbreaking part that Mo writes about in a memoir comprised of poems, essays, lists, and her own artwork. The book is called Good Girl, Soundbites from an Intimate Revolution, and I think it's best described as a brilliant, repeated kick in the chest, in a good way. And so today we talk with a former pro soccer player about almost nothing to do with soccer. Back we go to Burlington, where Mo Fitzgerald was kind enough to make time, a lot of time, to talk. Thanks so much.
No, thank you. This is going to be really fun.
So I think it makes sense just to kind of give people a sense for who you are and kind of, what got you to this point, to have you read at least the beginning of your book, if you would be so kind. And we'll talk a little bit about it from there.
Sure. The Great and Powerful. I went to see the wizard, about filling my heart with love. He boomed through fire and smoke, grand gestures and warm vows. He held me close and placed a yellow ring on my finger and a ruby kiss on my lips. With the smile of a salesman, he sold me a promise that I would be loved. It was perfect. Me, a young teacher, spreading ideas of justice, fueled by white privilege and guilt. Latin America was a fascination. I learned Spanish. I indulged in the culture. The rules felt different than those I grew up with. There was life here. Marrying a Mexican American whose father walked across the border, I awed at this American dream. No one expected much of me. I was a small kid. I didn't win tackles or headers, nor score all the goals. Somehow, quietly, and then all at once, I played for a crowd of 20,000. A professional. That one gorgeous summer, everyone knew my name. He was a local prodigy, the youngest person in his high school Hall of Fame. Player of the Year and a state champion. A professional, too. In El Salvador, he almost died from malaria. He almost died, and he came back from the dead and devoted his life to serving children. He was the trophy I would bring home to show my parents what a good girl I was, how deserving I was. My life blinked from black and white to color when he said he loved me. He told me I was different from everyone else. I understood that life was about giving back to others. He was persistent and all-encompassing. He called me the love of his life and then fiancé without even asking. He introduced me to everyone that way after we ran away from the waves. He kissed me as we overlooked the sprawling ocean. Our future felt just as vast. In a few weeks, I was hooked. I told my diary that he was it, a love bomb that felt like a fairy tale. We were to coach soccer and teach, to brighten the lives of young people the way we wished ours were. We were married on a hot summer evening in the Oregon countryside. The winery twinkled with tea lights and burgundy dahlias. When I said my vows, he kissed me before he was supposed to. He yelled, "I do," and the crowd delighted in his affection. We were going to live happily ever after. Oh, what a high tower to fall from.
Mo Fitzgerald reading from her book, Good Girl. It can't be easy to read that out loud, having lived through it.
No, it's not. We were married in 2018? Yeah, 2018. So it's been about 6 years now, and I cannot believe the time that has passed. I don't know if this is relevant, but ironically, I saw the last solar eclipse in the United States in McMinnville, Oregon, which is where he was from. And then this most recent one, I got to see it in obviously Burlington, and I didn't plan on seeing 2 solar eclipses in my life, but I just found it so fascinating that eclipses and the eclipse and the way that it was, the direction that it was moving in, from 2017, it was moving east to west. And now this one, when it passed through Burlington, it went from west to east. And I just thought, that's me. Like, I totally turned my life around. It was going in one direction, and then it crashed, and then I had to pivot, and I just could not, like, I've been overwhelmed with gratitude in being here and in being in the relationship that I'm in now. So yeah, looking back at the book, it's not something I like, the book is not something I advertise much, just because I don't know if I want to like force people to read something sad if it's not for them, but yeah, I'm just full of gratitude from where I was to where I am now.
Well, and assuming that I'll say it, probably everybody who hears this has not read the book, what was the fall?
So, as you heard, was swept up in this relationship. Really thought that this person was a really good person, especially the things that they were doing in the community and on paper. And so we got married, and in hindsight, I had ignored so many warning signs, so many red flags. But about 3 months into marriage, he revealed to me that he was addicted to meth. So it's like, oh my God. And then you go into savior mode because you've put in the time and the effort and the money, and everybody came and all of your relatives flew in, and you're like, I gotta make it work. If I can't make it work, then what's wrong with me? And there's so much shame around divorce and separation that I couldn't handle that. So once he revealed that to me, then it became this mission of save him. And he went to inpatient rehab, came back, was using again. We moved out of the house that we had bought. I sold that house on Craigslist. I was a teacher. He wasn't working. I had 2 soccer teams that I was doing coaching for free. And then I was doing lessons on the side to make ends meet. I'd borrowed money from my parents, from a friend. I had like a couple $100 in my bank account.
And he had maxed out your credit cards, right?
Yeah, he had been using my money. So it was sort of an untangling from once I realized, I was like, because meth is serious. Like, you don't, I was the kid when, I was terrified of drugs. And I think this is how something like this happens. I grew up in a very sheltered community, very nice community, but I didn't know that kind of darkness, and I didn't understand that kind of behavior. So then when somebody presents that to you, all I had was compassion and, well, let's get you better. So from there then...
Compassion's not a bad default.
No, and as a teacher too, I think being a teacher at the time really fueled into that, because teachers are always seeing the good in people. And even when they can't see it, and you're always rooting for someone to, and you can see the improvement by pouring into somebody. But that's what's different between a child and an adult. And especially somebody that you're in a partnership with. And then I learned about codependency, and I was going to Al-Anon, I went to AA, I was questioning my own substances and substance use. And so the rest of that year was an untangling, and then I filed for divorce in November of 2019. He didn't sign anything. He signed papers acknowledging that it would go that he had been served papers, and then COVID happened and the courts were about to shut down. So then I booked it to the courthouse, and then after that I was like, you know what? I am so glad this didn't happen a year later, because I'm just thankful who I'm not quarantined with.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was the fall. I also left teaching at the time, and I was at a very high trauma impacted school, not very many resources, and lots of putting out fires all day. And so I was just in a chaotic environment at school, and then I would come home and be in another toxic, chaotic environment. And it just was, it totally shattered me. I questioned all of my decisions up until that point, because I can sit here and play the victim and abuse, and I will sit here and say that it was abuse and that I was a victim of abuse. However, I can't sit in a victim mindset, because I have to understand the choices that I made that put me in that position as well. Because if I don't, then I'm going to repeat the same things, because humans repeat their behavior. So that's when a big journey of healing started to take place.
You were journaling through this whole period, and to read some of your journal entries, it's heartbreaking to see someone who really just questions everything about herself.
Yeah, and I think that when you're with somebody who's an addict, and he also happened to be a narcissist, so, double whammy, but they attract people that already are deprived of love and self-respect, and so that when they say things to you that are mean, it's actually not that surprising, because you're already saying those things to yourself. And I had a moment maybe a year ago, and I still battle with a really tough inner critic. This morning I was even like, can you please shut the fuck up? I'm in yoga. I drove 20 minutes here to not have you criticize me through this whole class. And then the narcissist, it's death by 1,000 cuts, and then they just prey on all of your insecurities, so that by the time you're done and you've been gaslit, everything you do has been questioned. You're in trouble for things you didn't know you could get in trouble for. So then you start to question your own choices, your own judgment, your opinion. You don't know what's what. I had to really block everybody out for an extended period of time while I was going through divorce, because I couldn't discern my own inner voice from the voices of other people's, because I was in such a people-pleasing mode. And I think when you're in survival mode, you're just trying not to upset people, because the person that is supposed to love you is attacking you. So then you become hypervigilant, and you become, how can I walk? You walk on eggshells to make sure you don't piss that person off. And I still have a lot of hypervigilance, and I have to work at that constantly. But I think it's twofold. I think you walk in with a low self-esteem, and then a narcissist just feeds on that.
Why do you think it took you so long to realize that what you had been going through was really abuse?
you don't want to think that what you experienced was abuse. And I think that there's so much conversation right now about trauma and mental health, wellness, abuse. I never wanted to be inauthentic or just like add to the noise or be like, look at my wound, help me. And I had a therapist that I'd been working with at the time, and she never brought up narcissism. Never. And she knew, but she had brought it up maybe like one time. And she was like, I think he might be, but it was never something that we talked about extensively as abuse. So when I saw a sign, which is in the book, I saw a sign on the street in Portland that said narcissistic abuse counseling. And I was like, what's narcissistic abuse? It had been a year at that time since divorcing. And I was like, and I read the book, and I just had this like clarity wash over me of like, oh my God, like, did these motherfuckers get a handbook? Like, how is it so... I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this program, but here we are. But I don't even remember the question anymore.
It was how you came to realize that it really was abuse, and not codependency, which it sounds like your therapist had kind of put in your head. Yeah,
a lot of it was like, this is your fault, you are codependent, or, she was very, very Christian. I'm not necessarily Christian or I identify with organized religion, very spiritual, which I think we'll talk about later. But the narrative in my head was like, well, this happened because you're codependent and you're out of alignment with God. So it was like, well, how do I get back in alignment? And then it hit me. I was like, I didn't deserve this. I didn't ask for this. I didn't bring this into my life because I'm codependent or because I like serving other people. This happened because this person was a bad person and this person was broken. And it is like, you live long enough and shit happens. You run into some shitty people. So I think, how did I come to realize? Honestly, reading. And I think that whole first year of divorce and the pandemic hit, and I had time back because I was working remote. And I had stopped coaching completely. First time without a soccer season since I was probably 7. And I was like, okay, so who am I? And then I just kept reading, memoirs and nonfiction and fiction, and then eventually stumbled on, the narcissistic abuse. And I picked up a book, and it was like, oh my God. And then that felt like a huge turning point for me to take ownership back of my life.
And writing.
Yes.
The thing that's really, there's a lot that's amazing about this book, but I think there are a lot of people, this sounds stupid, there are a lot of people who could have written memoirs about what a hard period they went through, but we get to read pieces of your journal, and we get to read poetry, and you have these lists that, my jaw kept dropping every time, like, I came to appreciate the context you were able to put on your life through these lists. Just the number of times this happened and the number of times this happened. And, in a way, it was a really clever way of you're sort of taking stock of what had just happened. Mm-hmm. Were you writing all of these things even as it was going on?
I wasn't writing lists. I've kept a journal since I was in 8th grade. And I have journals as far back as high school and college. So I was able to pull from so much good content. Good content.
Yeah, I don't
know. I like to call it composting, like taking the past and using it to nourish what you're doing now or nourish where you're going. So when I sat down to write the book, I actually didn't intend to write about my own story. I wanted to put together a book of poems. And that book, eventually, when I kept, whittling at it, I think of like this, the statue of David, or any sort of marble, where you just have the block in front of you and you whittle at the marble until something starts to reveal itself, and then you're like, oh, that's it. That's the thing I have to do. I have to talk about that thing. So then I was like, okay, well, I have to tell the story. And so I wrote out, originally it was all poems, showed it to a good friend who was a colleague at the time, and she was like, you know what? I just still think you're being a really good girl. I think that you're worried too much about how the writing is coming across, but I'm craving so much more intimacy with you, and I want to know what happened. So I totally got it. There was a conversation between Glennon Doyle and Elizabeth Gilbert. Elizabeth Gilbert wrote Eat, Pray, Love, and Glennon, who he's now married to Abby Wambach, but is known for so much more. When she was writing Untamed, she showed it to Elizabeth Gilbert, and Elizabeth Gilbert said, well, your writing is very tame for a book about being untamed. So I was like, okay, I think I get it. So then I went back home, and I spent the whole day rewriting the first chapter and making it messy, because I wanted the book to reflect the process of healing. It is nonlinear. It is very messy. You're piecing together things that you remember, and you're trying to come up with whatever the story is, what happened. So, I call it scrapbook style, and the subtitle of the book is Sound Bites from an Intimate Revolution. These were sound bites. These were conversations I had. The way the brain works is like, oh wait, this thing relates to this thing, relates to this thing, relates to this thing. And the lists are a way to quantify. I think when we talk about, trauma or, experiences that we have, it's so emotive and it's so qualitative that I think we don't look at the numbers behind somebody's experience. And the lists, I think, are helpful, and
they're a little funny in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, ironic, funny in an ironic way.
I tried to keep it humorous where I could. Nobody can go too long without a good joke. And I think humor and sadness really do live in the same place. So your propensity for light is equal to your propensity for dark. So if you can, I think some of the best comedy, for example, is really dark comedy. Anyway, that's a different story.
When did you start drawing?
So that was pandemic. I was doodling just as something to do. I think I had time, honestly. And as they say, art fills the void. I'm somebody who has a lot of inner challenges, inner conflict. I think most people have inner conflict. I used to teach English, and if there was a character without inner conflict, they were probably not a very good character.
Or they were going to get killed off in the first chapter.
They're not a whole person. Let's kill them. So I started doing that, and but I never saw myself as an artist. I still struggle to call myself an artist just because of the imposter syndrome that probably comes with that. But then I go, well, Mo, do you consider yourself an athlete? And I'm like, I don't know. A lot of it is just labels. And in some of my healing work, I've tried to disconnect from identity markers, whether that's, friend, daughter, girlfriend, teacher, consultant. These are just things that we think about ourselves but who we really are is beyond our conception, because we'll never fully understand ourselves. So anyway, the art, I needed something to make me feel good, especially after writing such a heavy book. And in the same vein, I went into improv, and I was like, okay, I spent a lot of time meditating on sadness and darkness, which I think is necessary. I think everybody has to, because it's a component of life that you just have to accept. And I fight it every time I'm sad, but I come to the conclusion that this is how it's going to be, and you're going to be sad again.
There's that line in When Harry Met Sally about when the shit comes down, I'm going to be ready and you're not.
Yeah. Fantastic movie. We could do a whole podcast on that. Quoted all the time. My favorite line is when Meg Ryan is in, she's crying, she's got snot all over her face, and she goes, I'm difficult. That's me. But yeah, so the poetry and the art, it's all kind of coming together. And when I wrote in journals, but I was never the top English student. I always told my kids when I taught English, I'm a fake English teacher, which I think makes you a little bit more relatable. Yeah, I think that the pandemic and having, a big curveball thrown at you in life, you kind of throw everything up in the air and you go, well, who am I? What do I want to do with my time? And what do I enjoy doing, and what have I kept myself from doing for so long. And I love my time with soccer. I'm sure we'll get to that, but it took up so much of my childhood and then my 20s, and that it was like, I know that there's more to me, so how can I allow that? How can I give that the time and the space it needs to develop and explore?
You talk about, your path or your journey to healing. Do you think can anybody ever really be healed? Is that an arbitrary point in a continuum?
Yeah, such a good question. It's a practice for sure. If there was an end point, I don't know what that looks like. Healing. Yeah, no, there's no end point. It's just it's a commitment to yourself, to stay tethered to yourself, especially when things are not going your way. And I mean, you could think, okay, well, you got divorced and you had all of these other great qualities and things going for you. Once you got rid of that schmuck, like you're probably flying, you're doing great. And it's like, there's so much that goes into rebuilding. And there were times when I was like, I don't know what is better. I don't know if I deserve better. I don't know what that future looks like, but I know this ain't it. And you have to stay so committed to this ain't it. They say pain pushes, vision pulls. So the pain of that relationship pushed me, and then I had to, even if it's a very, very dim light at the end of the tunnel, or even if you can't see the light, you just have to keep putting one foot in front of the other, knowing that eventually it will be over and you will be in a new chapter. But there's absolutely no promise of that reality showing up anytime soon. So that's the commitment and staying tethered to self, which I'm really glad. I was just saying to my partner, Brad, I wouldn't suggest anybody get married to a drug addict and divorced. However, if I had to do it, then I'm grateful, because I feel like my radar for BS and real and integrity and those things are so on high alert. I have so much clarity and clairvoyance that when other people now walk into my life and they're salesmen, I know that they're a salesman from the minute they open their mouth, and I'm never going to be sold something again. You know what I mean? Like, it's gonna come from a place of authenticity and realness.
I mean, you should know, I was a little concerned about even getting in touch with you, because I didn't want you to think I was just here to exploit your story.
No, please do. I want to sell more copies.
You mentioned your therapist, or at least your first, I don't know how many therapists you've had.
Oh, but, so many.
Yeah. We could compare therapy notes sometime if you want, but was very Christian, and you said you really don't identify, I gather, I mean, Irish Catholic family.
Yeah.
But you don't identify with a religion now. But what is, I mean, forgive this question, but what is God to you?
Yes, God. God is love. Ironically, I feel like everybody's a teacher in your life, and this conversation about God really, and God being love, actually started with my former spouse, as full of shit as he was. So I grew up in a, like I said, kind of a sheltered, very Christian, Presbyterian area, lots of Mormons. We get a lot of Mormons west of the Mississippi. Yep. And I just saw what organized religion did to everybody and all my friends, and I was, at the time, Oregon had just outlawed gay marriage, and I was very outside. I remember getting in an argument with a friend's dad about this in the car on the way to basketball. But I could not understand organized religion. And then my dad, being Irish Catholic, has a lot of guilt. He does not affiliate with Catholicism. But all of the norms and cultural isms around being Catholic and the guilt associated with that, I definitely feel and I think a lot of that is related to that inner critic. So, and then was, started going down this journey and going into more like Marianne Williamson, A Course in Miracles route. And a miracle, for example, is just a shift in perspective, which I was like, oh, I can get on board with that. I understand that. And she wrote this wonderful book about her reflections on A Course in Miracles called A Return to Love. And the return to love is that we're all basically in this delusion of fear and scarcity, and God is actually abundance and love. And so if we can tap into what's already present, then we're already in communion with God. The way I see it too is we are creations. And so if we create, like write or do art or play a game, and you're, creating something with your body, you are in communion with God, because creation is like creativity is just prayer. And I think that there's been a huge movement of people throughout history that have co-opted God and used God in the name of war and suffering. And you can see in the United States, even, and in just the world in general, there's a move away from organized religion. And I don't think necessarily it means there's nothing. I think that there is something beyond our comprehension, and we can call it love, you could call it the universe, you could call it spirit, you could call it oneness, whatever makes sense to you. It doesn't really matter what we call it, because my language is so limited because I'm a human, and the universe is so intelligent, and it's so broad and spans any amount of time that I could ever have here. So I could try to analyze it, but I know that I feel better when I feel, and this is, I kind of changed my worldview from my dad's to say, this is more my mom's side. There is a God. God does care about you. God is love. And when you remember that God is love, you remember that you are love. So it's not, are you loved? That's not the right question. You are love. So you are God. If that makes sense. It's a little bit roundabout. I think the other thing to add about God is nature. And this is why I love Vermont, because, and coming from Portland, Oregon, you get to spend, and the pandemic really forced me outside because there's nothing to do. I was not a big hiker prior, but now, I'm hiking, I'm camping, I'm doing all the things. And I feel I am in alignment. I feel there is abundance. I feel love when I am outside. I love listening to the birds, touching trees. We have this preciousness about nature that says, don't touch it because you don't want to break it. But we are nature, and we have to be in relationship with nature. So, I like to take my shoes off all the time and walk on grass and get in the water and get dirty. And I think that's humans coming home and being with this creation that's here, that's beyond our comprehension. And the greatest designer is, of course, nature. I cannot believe some of the shit she comes up with. It's amazing.
Like Champlain, pretty amazing.
I was in it yesterday. I got to park myself on a rock and just be on the lake for 3 hours. I was so fortunate. I was just like, wow. This is, and water. Oh, don't get me started on water. That is the most healing. It's a baptism, it's a renewal, it's all of it.
Is, aside from like the bookending nature of the two eclipses, do you feel like, does Vermont open a new chapter in what Mo Fitzgerald is about? Absolutely.
I feel like I've gotten another chance. And I think I read some statistics pretty early, like if you get divorced, which is 50% of us are going to, then your chances of getting another divorce go up about 60 to 70. So I was like, shit. So this might be it for you. And don't be surprised. I don't know, when you're in a headspace and in a place for so long, I just could not imagine that period of my life being over. And now, once I realized, this move to Vermont was happening, it was like, I did feel that I had a new lease on life, and that I got to be free. Like, there was so many like when you live in the place that you've grown up for your whole life, you know everybody and everybody knows you, but so you have community, but it's also limiting because they know you in a certain singular context. And I feel being here, I love that nobody knows me. I love that I get to be myself. I love that I get to take classes, and nobody's checking in on me in Portland, but it's just different. And especially being in a community that's so receptive, I've just been like, in even just a couple of weeks, I've been able to make new connections, and it feels like a new chapter. It feels like I'm, in the tarot deck, there's the Fool, and at the Fool is the beginning of the journey, and where anything is possible. So it doesn't make you stupid, but it just makes you don't know what the unknown unknowns. So I like being in the unknown unknowns, I guess. And yeah, Vermont's excellent. No notes.
So you wrote this book, you gave up teaching, you more or less gave up soccer. You're consulting. How did that come to be? And what's the fulfilling part of the work that you do with the companies with which you do it?
So yeah, I taught for 4 years, middle through high school, and my mom was a special ed teacher for 30 plus years. So there was a really thorough understanding of education, but also how the system was broken, because the special ed department is the first thing to get cut, to get slighted, and my mom definitely came home and talked about it. So a lot of our dinner conversations were about the injustices of the system. So I left teaching, got this job at this agency, no idea what they did. I still don't really know what they do. But it was, as time has gone on, I've gotten to do some really, really fantastic, interesting projects, one of them being with Nike Women. And so as being a former athlete, I get to come, a female athlete, and having been in a D1 environment, in a professional environment, and I could talk for days on this, but I know that even when you're at the top, the system is not set up for women to succeed. Actually, it's set up for abuse. It's set up for, I didn't get paid anything. So, exploitation. So when my work with Nike Women, Nike has for a long time been a boys club, and they're very good at, masculinity and performance and victory and win at all costs. And what's interesting is that women don't identify with the word athlete because it's so traditionally masculine, and not in a good way. And I don't even think sport is necessarily set up for men to succeed in a healthy way. There's so much toxic masculinity within sport. That's a different conversation. But so my work with Nike Women is going, okay, our strategy reaching women is not working. The company is not doing well with women. They're the number one cool brand in the world, but they're really losing with women. So what are we supposed to do? Like, do we call sport movement because they don't like the word sport? What do we do with the word athlete? And so it's like, well, we have to stop. And this goes back to, I just was talking to, she's the Global Women's Marketing Director, and we have to stop asking women to lean in, and we have to start thinking of basically, like, the premise is we are asking her to love sport, but has sport ever really loved her, right? Like, have we ever thought about the systems? And I mean, we'll just take one example. Let's look at the Thorns, which is one of the best clubs in the world. We've got Sophia Smith on the team, Christine Sinclair. We had Crystal Dunn last year. Like, we've got internationals from all over the world.
This, for people who don't know, this is the NWSL team in Portland.
Yes.
For whom you played.
For whom I played, yes. That 20,000 person stadium, they sell out their games all the time. It's a fantastic atmosphere. If you look at it, okay, the owner of the team is a man. The coach of the team is a man. The physical therapists on the team and the doctors are all men. The kit managers are men. Like, you just start to break it down, and then, okay, well, it's fine, they're all men. But what about their experiences? Their experiences are all through the lens of men. So what I do with coaches now and players is talk about coaching through the female perspective, because I've only had one female coach my whole life. And even that wasn't a very good experience, because I think when women get into these positions of highly competitive environments, they lose their femininity, and that feminine softness, intuition, and they overcompensate and try to be mean or harsh and, well, it's just tough love and this is what I had to do to get here. And what we're seeing now is this movement of women that are like, and you can see it like with the WNBA players like Angel Reese being like, you can be feminine and an athlete. Being feminine is not the antithesis of being an athlete, but we have decided as a society that being masculine is what is associated with being an athlete. So anyway, this is a long story to say my work with Nike Women is helping them to understand that they're building the system for her to succeed, but that comes with acknowledging and recognizing that that system, the system as it stands, is not built for her. So we have to stop. We have to think of our strategies totally differently. It's not about empowering her. It's about creating the conditions for her so that she can do what is inherently natural for her, and that's her own magic. That's her, because I know what sport did for me. Changed my life. Who knows if I'd get out of that relationship if I didn't have sport, because I didn't have that inner belief in myself. It's brought me community, it's helped me travel the world. And if you look at, the top Fortune 500 CEOs, those that are women, the majority played competitive sports growing up. I think that sport is one of the number one things towards equity, towards gender equity, or even racial equity in this world. Then some of the other stuff I've gotten to do, I'm finishing up a piece of work with Juilliard's prep division, which is really exciting. They're trying to change the face of classical music. Only about 3.5% of classical music is brown and black. We got to change that, right? There's systems of oppression that are limiting people into what opportunities they can have. So this work is about their storytelling strategy. How can we tell the story of what this program is doing better? Because it's an incredible program. The people are amazing. But you see the name Juilliard and you go, oh, especially if you're from a community that is not of the Juilliard community, you have imposter syndrome and you go, that's not for me. Or how is that going to help me put food on the table? Why would my kid go do that? So it's about changing that storytelling to be able to reach those audiences so they feel compelled to be a part of that community and to take a chance on something that is so transformational and so life-changing. So I do work that sucks my soul too. I got to pay my bills. But those are some of the things that I really love doing.
And for someone who was a social justice focused teacher for the years you were, this sounds like you can still do these things that you care about without necessarily the tax of the education system kind of inflicting itself on you.
Yeah, I love how much my education background plays into my consulting background. I think that that's what makes me actually unique and differentiates me as a consultant. My dad tells me all the time, nobody likes consultants, so I try to be the antithesis of that. I want to bring my own, what I see and what I read and femininity and natural systems and biomimicry and these sorts of things that need to come into the corporate world, because we can't just be doing the work with the good guys. Not that anybody that I work with is the bad guy, but we need all systems to change. We don't just need the good ones to change or to keep doing what they're doing. So yeah, I get to pull on facilitation, storytelling, strategy, leadership and development, team culture. It's really cool how all of this is coming together as I'm, just blending. I never thought teaching and business went hand in hand, and actually they do quite a bit.
So I feel like I can't let the opportunity go by without asking you. I mean, you play D1 soccer, but even D1 men's soccer isn't known for its huge crowds of people. So having done what you did, youth soccer and D1 soccer, and then stepping out onto the field in Portland with 20,000 fans there, what is it like to play in front of like this many people who are adoring what you're doing?
I mean, you're terrified, right? Because you're like, I shouldn't be here. My experience as a college athlete was disappointing from my perspective. I started at Boise State, and while I did really well, we won our league, it was also an abusive environment. So I transferred to University of Oregon, where I had a lot of friends, and as they say, it's just a different color on the other side, or whatever the phrase is.
Same shit, different day.
Same shit, different day. Grass ain't greener. It was also an abusive environment. So I finished up playing college soccer very ready to be done, and very much, I never want to touch a ball again. So then I got back into playing through co-ed indoor and playing in men's league, and what I found was that I actually love soccer. I just hate the people that ruin the game. And when you're playing, and this is what kids miss out on so much today, is I got to play without anybody telling me what to do, and I got to play without worrying about my playing time. So I was allowed to try things. I managed myself, my own body. That does not happen in Division I sports. Someone else is managing your body, and usually it's a man who has no idea what your sport is about because they were hired to do football. Just saying. So to be called up to the Thorns was its own thing. That's its own, that was never going to happen. And then to start and to get to play, it was so surreal. And I still think back to that game where it was sold out crowd. And I was teaching that year. I had students in the crowd asking for my autograph. And I was like, I can't even get you to turn in homework. And you're going to come here and ask for my autograph? No. It was, and they had a TIFO, which are the big signs, and it said Misfits, and I don't know. I still probably haven't fully grasped it, because I was also an intern that first year. The Thorns were a team, and I wasn't paid anything. I was working 40-hour weeks, and I remember just sitting up in the offices looking down at the field, just that would be really cool, but there's no way I'd get to do that. I just had this separation between the elite players and myself. And yeah, I think the narrative that I tell myself sometimes is even flawed. Well, you were there for the summers, you went back to teaching, why didn't you keep going, or whatever. And I actually got called up 2 years ago during the pandemic. They needed more players. They needed a player, which is a whole different thing, a whole different issue. But I went back, and there were players there that had been there for the last 5 years since I had been there. And I was like, how you doing? Well, how's life? And they're like, I'm driving Uber, I'm driving DoorDash, missed this wedding. And I'm like, oh, I remember why I couldn't do this. I couldn't have made a living. What was I gonna do? Give up my paid job and insurance and go live with my parents at 26? No way. I'll do that at 30. And growing up in Portland, we had University of Portland women's team that won a national championship a few times. We had the Thorns. We had hosted a Women's World Cup game there. I had this idea in my head that women's soccer was really huge. And now when I look back 15 years, it's no, it was nothing. This was so rare for you to have done this. So when people ask me, did you always want to be a professional soccer player? I was like, no, it didn't exist. There was no league, not a stable one, and not one that paid. And so it's just surreal. I wish I could replicate that moment. But yeah, mostly you're just trying to win the game and keep your head on. You're not thinking too hard about everybody watching you.
Right, you're not watching yourself on TV. No. You're actually doing it.
You have to do the thing, and it feels like tunnel vision a bit, because you're you can't comprehend what's going on. Yeah.
Do you still have a kit with your name on it?
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, I got that frame. Yeah. Yeah, I have a kit. I could wear it, but there's just no need.
It's like wearing the concert T-shirt.
Yes,
concert, right?
You get it. You can't wear that. Nah, it's all good. There's a few Fitzgerald kits out there, and I don't know. It's probably less than 10 though.
Maybe this is an unfair question, but do you have a vision of yourself 10 years from now, what you hope the Mo Fitzgerald of 2034, God help us, is going to be doing?
This is such a good question. I'm in a transition. Obviously, I just moved here, but I'm also moving into independent consulting. So I'm like, well, what are you doing here? What do you want to do with your time? How do you want to be? And I think it's everything I read and listen to always comes back to the how. The what, it will change. The form and the identity markers that you have will change throughout your life, but how you show up is the most important. So I think whatever I'm doing with whoever's in front of me, I hope to make their day better. I hope to bring light and clarity and humor and joy into their experience so that they may, go on with their life a little bit better off. I think we all have that power and possess that power. And we have to take care of each other. So I hope I become more of myself. I hope the inner critic dies. I hope that or continues to get quieter. I want to be in the room with people jamming on ideas about how we can build really amazing things that are going to impact the world and create the conditions for everybody to like I said, access their own inner power. I don't think I have to bring it out of anybody. I think I just, as a facilitator and as a consultant and as a teacher, I'm just creating the conditions for the conversation to happen within a person and within a group of people. So that's what I hope continues, is just that I make a positive impact on the world and show up, even if I'm not loving it or it's sucking my soul, just continue to be committed to joy and love and abundance and not be full of shit, I guess. You have to edit a lot.
Well, this has been really kind of a life-affirming conversation, and I'm so glad you let us into your world.
Thanks, Mitch. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Mo Fitzgerald, former pro soccer player and teacher in Portland, Oregon, poet, writer, artist, consultant, and author of the memoir Good Girl, Soundbites from an Intimate Revolution. She now lives outside Burlington along the miracle that is Lake Champlain. You can read more about her and see some of her work at ncpr.org/northwards. Our interview today was recorded at the Vermont Center for Emerging Technologies. Thanks so much to Peter Anderson for access to our space. Our own poet, writer, and artist in residence is Ethan Shanty, and he's here to tell us who made this show possible.
Northwards is an NCPR podcast production. The show is written, edited, and produced by Mitch Tyke with digital production supervision by me, Ethan Shanty. Caitlin Kelly handles our social media, Bill Hanel is our digital director, and Doyle Dean is our production manager. Music is by the Wickmore Jazz Trio of Plattsburgh. To support this show and find more podcasts, visit ncpr.org. This is NCPR, North Country Public Radio.